Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hi everyone and welcome to English with Kirsty. So this week I have an interview for you. I'm talking to Nick. Nick's from Germany and she's now living and working in the UK. And actually she was one of the people that filled in my Germans in the UK questionnaire. So I will also link her answers to that on the show notes page, which this week is www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast/episode 37. And I'll also link Nick's website because she provides services for people who want to apply for jobs in the UK, so help with your CV and interview preparation. So you can have a look at that if you click through to her website. And she also has a podcast called Happy Life Move, and that's about people who've moved. Well, the first series is people who have moved from one country to another country. And this second series is about people specifically who have moved to the UK, so from different countries but to the UK. So they are interesting interviews. I listen to them as well. I enjoy the podcast, so I would also recommend that you check out her podcast. So all the information about that can be found on the show notes page. So that's all for today. I'll leave you with the interview now, and I'll be back again next week. Well, thank you for agreeing to be on my podcast. It's great to talk to you today.
Thank you very much for having me on. I love that.
Yeah, it's good to talk to another podcaster, and I'll mention in the show notes about your podcast because I'm sure that's something that will be interesting for the listeners. Maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about your experience, your own personal experience of being interviewed in the UK. So how that's different to the interviews that you've been to in Germany and what you felt, any kind of differences that you noticed in terms of the kind of questions or the way people spoke to you.
Well, first of all, I would say the differences aren't really fundamental. It's more the smaller things because England, UK, Germany, and of course Austria, where I've lived for the past 12 years, are not that different. And also, I have to add, since I am a recruiter, I've mostly been sitting on the other side of the table. So my recent experience is actually fairly limited because I arrived in the UK about a year ago and I've only had a handful of interviews, a phone interview and 2 face-to-face interviews, and then I got a job. The questions are fairly similar, strengths and weaknesses, why do you want to work in this industry, with this company, tell us a little bit about yourself. All these things are actually very, very similar. As far as any differences are concerned, yes, there are a few. For example, the English are very, very polite and intent on making people feel at ease. So while I was being interviewed in Germany and in Austria, I had much more probing questions. The interviewers were slightly less concerned with how candidates are feeling, and I actually had quite a few interviews where people were, fairly rude.
Okay.
In 2 cases, extremely rude, criticizing my languages and other things, and also showing me through their body language and speech that they aren't really interested in taking things further. So I actually fairly shortly into some interviews realized that they weren't interested in me at all, and they just went through the motions, which was uncomfortable for me. And I can't imagine this happening in the UK. People would not be so open about the actual intent that they have.
Possibly not. And in one way, it's nicer for the person being interviewed because you're not made to feel uncomfortable. But I guess on the other hand, you shouldn't build up your hopes just because somebody was nice to you, because they're probably going to be nice to everybody. And
yes,
it shouldn't give you a full sense of security.
That's a very good point you're making. Of course, it's not quite black and white, but I think I do prefer the English way.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. And that's interesting. A lot of people are saying that communication with English people is a bit different. So that's something we're going to look at in another place. But that's interesting that you've mentioned that people are more polite, and sometimes that leads to them not always saying what they mean, but they do generally want people to feel better.
Yes, well, that is a very fine difference, how people talk to each other here and what they actually mean. That's true. You always have to bear that in mind.
So as somebody who's working in recruitment now, perhaps you could tell us a couple of the questions that you know often come up and how you would advise somebody to prepare for those questions.
Yes, definitely. Well, there is, of course, a lot of information online about typical interview questions and how best to answer them. The ones that I want to mention are two. The first one being, what are some of your weaknesses? And the second one being, have you got any questions for us? Because in my experience, this is where most people slip up. The first one, what are some of your weaknesses? Sometimes people think they can just crack a joke and say, oh, it's chocolate, or I love shopping, which is in a way that's cute, but it's an unprofessional answer, because this is really about how well do you know yourself and how honest are you. So I would recommend that you think of one, not more than one. I've never given more than one area where you know that you're not very good. It can be maybe administration. Maybe you're not very well organized. Maybe you tend to sleep too long in the morning, so you set different alarm clocks and go to bed early the evening before.
Okay.
So whatever weakness it is, it should first of all, in a way, affect your work. Otherwise, if you say, well, it's chocolate, it has nothing to do with your work, and that's just a total non-answer. And secondly, find something that's not too bad, and also immediately say how you are working around this problem that you have. So if you say, well, I'm not very good with administration, you could say, but I'm aware of this, and every morning I make a list of things that need doing, and I check them off during the day so I can make sure that everything gets done.
Okay.
Something like that.
So you're being honest, but you're also showing that you can find solutions to these problems.
Yes, absolutely. This is not about showing, this is not about making you look bad. It's just about showing, are you aware of what you are like as a person, and how do you deal with it? And the second question is, have you got any questions for us? I've really, even for management positions, I've had people who didn't really ask questions. And this is really bad, because it shows you, or at least the interviewer believes, that you're not interested in the position or the company. So I would recommend that you always do your research, look at the company, maybe look at the competitors, and naturally you will find a couple of questions to come up with. If you can't think of anything, or if maybe the interview was at very short notice and you haven't really had time to prepare, you can always ask something specific about the role. For example, what does a typical day in this job look like? Or even ask the interviewer about themselves. When did you join the company? How do you like working for the company? Anything is better than saying, no, I haven't any questions, because that just makes you look like a very poor candidate, to be honest.
It looks like you couldn't be bothered. You're just attending any interview you get and answering the questions you get. And it's like when people turn up and say the wrong company name or something like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you for that. I'm sure that will help the people that are preparing for interviews at the moment. And I know you've got a website and a podcast. I will add the links to the show notes, but perhaps you can tell us where we can find more about you online.
Absolutely. My website and the podcast is called Happy Life Move. So if you go to happylifemove.com, you can find the podcast. And I'm interviewing expats from abroad this season, second season, people who live in the UK but who are from abroad. And I'm asking them about how they prepared, how they like it, the problems they've had, and all kinds of things. So it's basically to motivate people to go abroad for some time, because I think it's an absolutely fascinating experience.
Yeah, so whether you want to improve your English generally or whether you are thinking about coming to the UK, I listen to this podcast, I can definitely recommend it. And I know that you also offer interview and CV training, don't you? So details of that are also on your website, aren't they?
Yes, they are. happylifemove.com, and then you just click on the respective links of the pages, and then they'll get you straight to where you want to go.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for your time today.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me here, Kirsty.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.